I almost went too soon. Welcome to LCC, Linwood Community Church. The get it right here in a second. The recording studios right here in Linwood, Barstow, California. I'm Les Pate, your host, and this is our Wednesday Bible studies. Tonight we're going to be continuing our studies with 2 Samuel. We'll be picking up at chapter 19, and we will do that in just a moment, right after prayer, and see how David is doing. Heavenly Father, as we come to you tonight, we just thank you. Thank you for the wonderful time that we've had listening to Uncle Albert. I know that there will be those who are thinking, who? But when you watch Lefty's, his devotionals that he has, you'll understand. It is so good to hear the words from a senior saint who has gone through the ups and downs of life that can tell you that being a Christian isn't always as smooth as you would want it to be, but boy, the rewards are great. And to see the reward of just that man to smile and saying, I love God, it was a reward enough for me. Lord, as we look at these words of yours today in chapter 19, 2 Samuel, help me to go through it. You know, I've struggled with this particular lesson, and that I've tried to discern what you want me to say and just put the words and the thoughts into my mind, and we will get through this, and hopefully it will be good, and that we will have a little fun as we're sharing the word. We will give you the honor, glory, and praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, last lesson, we left off with David weeping, crying over his son, Absalom. Absalom, of course, had been killed in battle. Actually, he was, well, we'll get into that in a moment. But he is crying out, and he has his hands, and the Bible says his face is covered. I believe he probably has his hands over his face. I know I did that when my son was killed, and he's crying out, and he's saying, oh, my son, Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. That was the last verse of chapter 18. And now we come and we see here in chapter 19, and I'm going to read the first 8 verses, and then we'll come back and answer some of the questions. Now, if you've not downloaded the questions, you won't know where we're coming from. But remember, to get there, it's linwoodcc.org. Follow the prompts. You can get your questionnaire there, and you can follow along with us and fill in the blanks if they're there, and we can share together. But here we go. Chapter 19, verse 1, and it says, And Joab was told, Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. Okay. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it said that day, The king is grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and this is what I'm saying. I can just picture that in my own mind because I did the same thing. He covered his face, and the king cried with the words, the loud voice, Oh, my son, Absalom. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines. And that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Verse 7. Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. And listen to these. For I swear by the Lord, If you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night. And that will be the worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate. And they told all the people, saying, there is the king sitting in the gate. So all the people came before the king, for everyone in Israel had fled to his tent. Can you picture it? Here's a grieving man who has lost his son. He's won a great battle, but he's lost his son. You know, I can remember some of the old war movies that I watched where the generals had had their sons killed in battle, but they were the generals, but then they still had to officiate the battles that they were before them. And they couldn't take the time to grieve. It was time of war. And I remember those things as if they were yesterday. And here I see this picture before me of a grieving father. And the first question here is, as you read verses 1 through 4, what did David fail to do? Well, he didn't fail the grieving part, that's for sure. But what we do see here is that he put his personal feelings before his people. And he is feeling sorry for himself when he should have been out there talking to his people and giving them the congratulations of winning a war. Remember back when Saul would go to war and he would come into a city after a triumphal war, the people would come and sing and dance and play music and just like we would see as a ticker tape parade, welcoming the heroes of the war. Well, this was not like that. This now is David grieving for his son, and he has put that over and above what he should have been doing. And Joab comes in and reminds him, get off your duff, get out there and see the people. And then he really says, for I swear. And to me, that was a way of lighting this light bulb up in David's head. And he says, oh, yes, I'm reminded. I need to be the king. And he goes to the gate. And the gate, if you remember, is above a gated city. And the king sits there as the troops left. They have come back. And he is there to greet them. Well, he's not there. What happens the next thing here is that question number 2 is Joab speaks to David about the troops in verses 5 through 7. What did Joab have to say? What I wrote is that David's grief over his son was ill conceived by Joab, but he considered Absalom an absolute traitor. Now, you got to remember that Joab is a killer. He is just a murderer, and he has no remorse on how he killed Absalom. The poor man was defenseless, hanging from a tree by his hair, and he puts 3 spears into his heart. If you remember back, when you go back to Abner, he killed Abner because Abner had killed his brother, and that was just an absolute murder in itself there. Here we see a general who has no remorse, that could swear by the Lord, say, if you don't go out there and take care of the troops, I think in Joab's mind that I'll take care of you if you don't take care of this. The men deserve that. And you get off your butt and get out there and do your job. And your job is to wave, just like the queen. If you look, sometimes you'll see the queen. Doesn't have to say a word. All she has to do is wave her hands to the people, and that satisfies. That's enough. This is what Joab is trying to convey to David. I think it's wise counsel, but the way he did it was to shame him. He's trying to shame Joab into thinking that, yes, the battle is won, and you killed the enemy, And I think what Joab is doing here is he is trying to convince David to thank him for killing his son. Why? Because back then, whoever killed the enemy, especially the leader of the enemy, would be rewarded handsomely. And I believe that there's also another motivating factor behind Joab's feelings here is that he wants David to either pay him for what he did, or secondly, to at least lessen the degree of anger that is building up in David, the way that Joab had killed his son. So there's a couple, in my thinking, the reason why Joab spoke to David this way. So, you know, again, this is purely speculation on my part. I have to look at it as the way a father would look at losing his son. You've won the battle, you've lost your son. It's like the Civil War. They fight each other. We see brother against brother. Well, we have one nation fighting against each other, the North and the South. Nobody wins in a battle like that. Here we see the battle is the victor. The victor, of course, is David. David is God's choice, but he loses his son, and Joab is trying to shame him into doing something now. And I believe that there's also other motivating factors behind that too. So that's what I just wrote there. Question number 3. What would be the consequences if David would not speak to the troops? Well, what Joab is saying, if you don't go out there and speak to the troops, there's not going to be a person left, nor will anybody ever follow you again in battle. It is your position to go out and speak to the troops. But there's also, he's saying, you need to go out there, King David, and thank the soldiers for their efforts on this victory. You need to go out there, King David, and praise those who led this battle. And they were brave. Why were they brave? Because they were tremendously outnumbered. David only had 20,000 plus men. Absalom had many, many more men than that. We know that 40,000 died and 40,000 more died in the bushes. 80,000. So we know that they were heavily outnumbered. Get out there and praise the generals, the leaders who led this battle. You also need to go out there, King David, and love the people. They loved you, or they wouldn't have gone to battle for you. And you must put your personal grievances away and do your duty as the king of the army. That is what you need to do. And this is what he is trying to convince David to do. The second thought I had too is Joab is an esteemed general of the army, and he is a very dangerous man, as I had said. He was also dangerous to David because he killed his son. And if he can kill his son with no remorse, he could easily kill David. So there is that thought there that I had. And that if he could do this, David knew that his life could be in danger. The way he just spoke to him. And that's why I put an emphasis on there when you say, I swear by the Lord, that he meant what he was saying. And you don't make those, especially back then, you did not make these kinds of statements and not be ready for the consequences of God. So those were my thinking. So what would be the consequence if David would not speak to his troops? Then there is the last question here that I have for this section is, what did David do and how did the people respond to his actions? And that's found in verse 8. Now David arose. He finally clicks, I need to do something. I don't think David was scared. He was aware of this murderous man. But he is a soldier in his own right. And I don't believe he's scared. He killed Goliath. I mean, here's a giant of a man. Here's Joab. He's just a man. But the difference between the two is that Joab is a sneaky man, while Goliath was just a big, brutal brute challenging people. And so here, David gets up, and he goes to the gate. And where is this gate? Well, it's in Mahanaim. which is in the northeast part of Gilead, which we've discussed before. It is a fortified city with a gate around it, or a wall, and the king would sit in his position, like on a throne, watch the people come and go. Now, no one could come or go without the king or the person that's sitting at the gate seeing it. In this case, no one would come and go without seeing the person in the gate. So they now see the king. They realize that he has now taken his position that he should be in, and that is being their king. And this is satisfactory. Now, whether he talks to him or not, it doesn't say. Whether he was waving to him or not, it doesn't say. All it says is that he went to the gate. That satisfied the people, for they knew that David was back in his right mind, taking the position that he should be, and that is king, their leader. And so what they do, they all then disperse, and they go home. David did his part. I also think Joab did his part, but I think God used him to make David realize that he had other responsibilities other than just his own personal loss. There were a lot of mothers and fathers lost their sons and daughters, or their sons anyway, during this battle. So it couldn't be just personalized to David only. Let's read now 9 to 23, and we'll answer the next a few questions here. It says, my Bible says David returns to Jerusalem. That's the name of this segment. And he says, now, and this is verse 9, starting there, now all the people were in a dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hands of the Philistines, and now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we appointed over us, you see, the people made him king. God anointed David. Big difference. We made him king. Over us, has died in battle. Well, we know from past experience and from our lessons is that to the victor go the spoils. Well, there is no need for wonder who's going to be the king, because the king won. He won the battle. And there shouldn't be any squabbling or bickering among themselves, because David is the rightful king. We have an upshot of Absalom wanting to be king, and he is doing this thing that against God, actually, and the people made him the king. Well, he lost the battle, and it's just as if Saul had won the battle. He is the king. And we go on here. But Absalom, who we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? They shouldn't be saying the thing. David could just go back in there and say, I'm the king. So King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king, to his very house? You are my brethren. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so me, and more so, if you are not commander over the army before me continually in place of Joab. 14. So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word to the king, return, you and all your servants. Well, he had the right to return anyway. They didn't need his approval. But anyway, it goes on. 15. Then the king returned and came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go and meet the king. Now, let's stop there for a second, because I just want to explain a little bit here, is that David is coming down from the northeast of Gilgal, which we know, and he is just about ready to cross over into the west side of the Jordan. Gilgal is about 2 miles north of Jericho. So when you start looking at your Bible maps, you'll see about where he's about ready to cross over into Jericho. And then from there is still another southwesterly trip to get to Jerusalem. And this was really where he wanted to go, which was the uh, palace of the king or of David at that time. Remember, when David was the king of the south, Judah, which it was called then, and it still is, it was in Hebron. Now, he made Jerusalem his palace because it was centrally located. And this is what we're looking at here, is he is ready to cross over the Jordan, the river, into Gilgal, which again is about 2 miles from Jericho, heading northwest or southwest to Jerusalem. It gives you that picture there. And here we go. And Judah came to Gilgal, Judah meaning all the people of Judah, to go to meet the king, to escort the king across the Jordan. And here comes some fun parts. And I want to have a laugh on this with you. And Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men with Benjamin, with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they went over the Jordan before the king. Then a ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. All right. Now, let's answer some of these questions. And what we have here is question number 5. It says in verse 9 and 10, what are the people speaking of? And they're arguing amongst themselves is what they're doing. They're speaking of who is going to, well, first of all, both sides realize that David needs to be the king. He is the king. But now they're squabbling on who is going to have the right to escort him over the Jordan. Shall it be the people of Judah, his kinfolk, or shall it be the tribe of the north, of the south, the 10 tribes? And they're saying is that we own David more than you do because there's 10 tribes of us and only one of you. Now, when we look at it that way, sometimes people forget that Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, is in Judah. So there's really 2, but they only call it one, Judah. And so what they're doing is they are arguing amongst themselves. Number 6. Who does David send word to speak to the elders in Judah? Well, we see here is that David sends Zadok and Abiathar to talk to the elders. Why do you think David would send these 2 priests and not go himself? And I thought about that. And the only thing that really comes to my mind is that David did not want the elders of Judah to think that they were in any kind of authority or any kind of position of power. David is the king. They are the elders, the advisors. They are not the rulers. So instead of sending himself, which would indicate that he acknowledges them of the ones who have the power, he sends emissaries or his people instead. He says, you go down there and you talk to them and we'll have it that way. He did not want the elders to think that they were in control of Judah. David is. And he says to them, appeal to the leaders of his own tribe to take the initiative in restoring him to the throne of Jerusalem. That's the answer for number 6. Number 7. Who does David appoint as commander of the army? Now here we see Joab being replaced as the commander again. Now perhaps word has gotten to David that Joab killed his son, his defenseless son. We don't know that. But we do know this, that there are certain politics that go along with being the king. And here we see that maybe it was reconciliation, maybe not, but we see here that David decides to make another man the commander of his army. Once before, Joab was demoted. And if you remember, when he killed Abner, It wasn't said that he was demoted, but when we go into taking the city of Jerusalem or Zion, is King David at that time said, whoever commands and takes the city, I will make the captain of my armies. Well, who did it? It was Joab. So Joab got his job back. Here we see that he has been demoted the second time. It doesn't set well with Joab. We'll see that later on. But he has been demoted. I believe, too, is that politics has a lot to play here, too. It says, I'm going to appease this side, and I'm going to make Amasa the commander of my armies. Well, what this does is this makes the people say, that's good. We're going to follow you because you are trying to make us one. Now, David is no fool. Let's just get that right out there. He is a master of these types of things. He's done this before. And so here he is using people to make the connection of trying to unite a divided nation. And so we see that possibly the second reason, of course, is that this would be a punishment to Joab for the killing of his son. Okay. Number 8. What do you think was the reasoning behind this? Now I'm talking about the promotion of Amasa. And did it accomplish anything? And is the references here, verses 14 and 15. Well, I have down here 4 things, and I've already discussed those with you, but I'm going to get into it here. For one is for political reasons, that was a token of reconciliation. What this is saying is, I have given the general of the opposing army the leadership of all of the armies. He says, this will show you that there is no animosity held against you, that I will not punish you or anyone else who followed the army against me. I'm making your general my general. And so therefore, there is this reconciliation. I forgive you. I think that is probably a very, very good reason. Second, he demoted Joab for his role in Absalom's death. I also believe that, David gets all of this information. Now, sometimes by chatting in the ear, whatever. But I know that David must have found out by now how his son died. Third reason was to unite the nation. We still see the nation divided. Why it's still called Judah? It's all still called Israel. Israel is the southern states, the southern tribes. Judah is the northern states. And Judah is the southern states. It's just like the Civil War. And here he is trying, like Abraham Lincoln did, to unite this. This is the United States. This is the united nation of Israel. It is not to be divided. We are brothers and sisters of a kind. God picked us as a nation, not as two. And then we have the fourth reason, which I've already said. It was to show forgiveness to those who followed Absalom. That too was very important. Did it work? Absolutely. It swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah. That's what it says. They now see that David really means what he says. If you're going to put a general of your adversary as general over all of it, we believe you now. And it sways the people in believing that David is sincere in what he is doing. Also, we see here too, there's some gentle swaying here too, where he's saying, you're the flesh of my flesh, the bone of my bones, and this. To me, these are like sweet speeches, and they're listening to it. People, they didn't have this kind of communications that we have now. They're listening to this, and it is now soaking into their minds, and they're saying, hey, they've made the enemy, the general, he is saying here, we're bone of bone, we're flesh of flesh, we're kinfolk. Yeah, we believe him. And their hearts are swayed, and that's what the main purpose was. Number 9. Okay, who came to meet the king and escort David. And who else came? Now, these are verses 15 through 18. Now, here is where I would say it gets a little bit fun, for me anyway. So I want to get to reading some of this so we don't forget. Then the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah, which is the southern part, came to Gilgal to meet the king, to escort the king across the Jordan. Fine. His kinfolk, the Benjamites, have come to help their kin cross the Jordan, come on down into Jerusalem. Come on, bro. Let's do that. Okay. But here is where we see Shimei. Who is this guy? Remember? Shimei was the guy in chapter 16 who was cursing David and causing him all kinds of grief. He is kicking dust on David and his men. He's throwing rocks at David, and he's calling a bloodthirsty man. You killed Saul. You killed his family, only so you could be the king. This is Shimei, the one who has made all these accusations, which were false, by the way. He's coming to meet the king. Why? Because he knows if he doesn't do something, his life is not going to be very long. So he comes and he's meeting the king. He says, please, please, please. Yeah, I didn't mean it. I was just kidding. You know how people will call you names. Well, I didn't mean it. I was just kidding. Well, this is what Shimei is really going to be saying here in a moment. He's the one that meets him because he knows his life is short-lived if he doesn't do something quickly. So he comes. Not only does he come, he comes with 1,000 men. So it tells me that he is from this little town of Bahram, which is not very big. It's just maybe a couple, 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem. But he is a person of distinction, let's say it that way. If 1,000 people will follow him, either that he is a leader in his own right or he's a very wealthy man. But he's there. And this is the man that we see here. But who else comes? Who else comes? There was 1,000 men with Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and 20 servants with him, and they went over the Jordan before the king. Now we see here is Ziba is now coming over to meet the king. He hasn't come over the Jordan yet. Ziba and his family and 15 sons and 20 servants and all that, they were going over onto the east side to meet David. Why? Because he knows he has lied about Mephibosheth, and he is there to make reconciliation, I believe, or at least to give his side of the story, which he doesn't really get a chance to do. But he is making his face seen. I think he's there to remind David. He says, remember, you gave me the estate of Mephibosheth, and I just want to remind you of that. So we see two really strange people who have been recorded in the Bible. One is an out-and-out liar, and the other one lied anyway, but not unknowingly. He's made accusations about the king, and we see here that they are the first ones in line to recognize David as the king. Why? It's because to save their own skin. That's why. Okay. 10. I said, what was Shimei's concern with the return of David? Well, as I said, he has a change of heart. Yeah, because he had cursed David, and he made all these accusations, like I say, of saying that he killed Saul, which he did not do. Saul was killed in battle, or actually he killed himself. He killed his family, which was not true. His son was killed by 2 rogue army people. It killed him. So all of this stuff was not true. But Shimei now realizes that his life is in danger too if he does not make some kind of reconciliation to David, and he is presenting himself, prostrates himself down onto the ground. He says, forgive me, I have sinned. Well, how do you say you don't forgive somebody when they prostrate themselves and said, I have sinned against you? It's pretty tough not to say, well, I'm not going to forgive you. I'm going to whack your head off. He doesn't do that. But I tell you, there was one person there who wanted to do that, and that brings us up to the question number 11, and that is this: is what did Abishai want to do with Shimei, and what was David's response for this request? Well, if you remember, Abishai wanted to kill Shimei. It's three chapters ago. He said, "Why are you letting this rogue dog, this dead dog, curse you like this? You're the king. Let me go over there and cut his head off. Let me kill him." Abishai wants to do it again. I don't blame him there. He remembers. He hasn't got a short memory. It's long term. He knows what he did. But David says no. He said no before. He said, God has put him here to insult me, to curse me, to do these things. Maybe God will forgive me for what I have done. Here he says no. He had already forgiven Abishai, or not Abishai, but Shimei for what he had done. But here is another reason, though. Think about it. This is for politics now. What if David said, okay, Abishai, you go over there and kill him? That's my first order of business since I've become the king again. Who do you think, or what do you think the other people are going to be feeling? Uh-oh, my life is in danger because he is going to kill those who are against him. And David's smart. He says, no, you shall not kill him. I'm not even the king yet. We will not do that. But later on, he tells his son, Solomon, to take care of business. But that's later on. That will be found in 1 Kings, and we'll get to that later. But you see, David's smart. He says, we shall not have any killings today. I'm not even the king yet. And even if I did, what would the people think of my first order of business is to kill my enemy? He's going into the enemy territory. I've forgiven them. I cannot do this. Abishai, be still. Okay, number 12 is this, verses 24 through 24 and 25. I don't even think I read that, did I? Let me go on down. I'm sorry, I didn't read some of the verses to you. Let me go ahead and go back. It says, now Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king, and he had crossed the Jordan. He came on over. Then he said to the king, do not let my Lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong was your servant did on that day that the Lord, the king, left Jerusalem. In other words, he says, hey, I was only kidding. And he goes down here and he says, that day you left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. He said, don't take my words to heart. I was only kidding. That's the way I look at that. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. Therefore, here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my Lord the king. He keeps saying, my Lord the king, my Lord the king, my Lord the king. I'm your servant. I'm your servant. You think he's trying to make a point? Yeah. He says, I was just those words, king, forgive me. I didn't mean it. And then going on down here is, but Abishai the son of Zeruiah answered and said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed the Lord's anointed. He's asking David that. And David said, what have I to do with you, the sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For I do not know that today I am the king over Israel. Therefore the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king swore to him. And this is what I'm saying, is that he gave him his word, and it's like any other man. And I look at this, and it gives me respect for when God gives his forgiveness for me, it's forever. David breaks his word, not in so much, but that he tells his son later to take care of business. He reneges on this swear. And he's like every man who sometimes forget that I will make my promise to you and you break it. But anyway, that's a different part. Now let's get on down here. It says David and Mephibosheth meet. 24. Now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So it was, when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may on ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. Therefore, do what is good in your eyes." 28. For all my father's house were dead men, before me, but my lord the king, yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore, what right have I still to cry out any more to the king? 29. So the king said to him, "Why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Ziba divide the land." That's not true. He gave the land, the estate, to Ziba. He didn't say to share it. Now, I had to stop and pause for a moment or two to think about that. Either David was consumed by other matters and his mind was thus not thinking properly, and I think that's probably it here, but he made a really bum decision again, and this is one of them right here. Then Mephibosheth said to the king, "Rather let him take it all, inasmuch as the Lord the king has come back in peace to his own house." What a statement that was. 13. What did Mephibosheth say about his servant Ziba? He deceived. He lied to David. David knows it now. He lied. Or David has now at least been brought another side of the story, and he should have thought about it before he had made this rash decision of giving all the estate of Ziba's, which was Saul's, to Ziba. It belonged to Mephibosheth. But David made a rash decision because he lied and he said, "Hey, your servant, he wants to be the king. He's following Absalom. And he's going to raise the house of Saul again. And the only one who is left is Mephibosheth, and he will be the rightful king." This is what Ziba had told David. David believed it, made a rash decision. "I'm going to give you all his estate then." And now we see here is that Mephibosheth has a different side of the story. And that is always the truth. When you hear these types of things, try to listen to the other man's side too before you make a decision. And here, David says, "Well, I've already told you to divide the land." It's not recorded anywhere here saying that. And what Mephibosheth says instead, and that's number 4, is 14 says, "How did David settle this matter between Mephibosheth and Ziba?" He tells them to split the land up. Split it up. You know, what was the answer, though, that Mephibosheth gave? How did he reply? Here's a noble man. He says, "Then Mephibosheth said to the king, rather let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house." He says, "I would much rather give everything away to have you back as king of Jerusalem over all of Israel." What a statement. You listen to that. It was materialistic. It didn't mean anything. He says, "What is more important to me, King David, is that you are safe, that you're alive, and that you have returned. Let him have it all." Think about that. Now we come to some other people who are going to meet up with David. And this is in verse 31. Now, here you have to kind of take into consideration that these stories that are recorded here are not necessarily in chronological order. And this is one of them that is not in chronological order. Because we can see the coming and going of David crossing over the Jordan, and this is prior or to. And you'll see here there's a discrepancy here, and the only thing I can tell you is that it is not in chronological order. And look at verse 31. We'll read down and then answer some questions. And then Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Rogelim and went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan. Now, Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. By the way, Uncle Albert, which we're going to see, is 92. Back then, aged was 70. He is now 10 years older than normal, and at that particular time. Now, I know if you go back into the Old Testament, you can see people that are 80, 800 years old, 900 years old. But at this particular time and point in history, 70 was considered really aged. He has lived past that. He's 80. And that's the reason why this is here. He's 80 years old. And we go on down. He had provided the king with the supplies while he stayed at Maranatha, for he was a very rich man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come across with me, and I will provide for you while you are with me in Jerusalem." I want to just kind of go over this with you because these questions are there. You can follow along. But what David is saying, he says, "For what you have done for me." What does he do for him? Remember when David was escaping Absalom, he crosses over the Jordan, and he goes now to Maranatha, and who meets him there? Barzillai and two other people, which was Shobi and Makar, have met him there and made all of these supplies for the people who are with David. This is the same person that is coming down to escort David over the Jordan to his own land, to Jerusalem. He's an older gentleman, as I'm saying, and David says, "Hey, for what you have done for me, Barzillai, my dear friend and ally, I want you to come and live in the palace for the rest of your life, and I will take care of you. You will eat at my table. You will be everything and be anything that you want to be in my palace." That's what David is offering him here. But the answer that Barzillai gives, though, is this. But Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem?" Now, up to and down from, these are always confusing sometimes. When we are coming from the north going to the south, you would think you're going up to. But Jerusalem sits on a plateau, and it's always from there going down from Jerusalem or up to Jerusalem. And that's really what we see, up to and down from. So that kind of explains what we're saying here. But Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I got to live that I should go up with you to the king to Jerusalem?" Going up. "I am today 80 years old. Can I discern between the good and the bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king, and why should the king repay me with such rewards?" He's saying, "I've done my duty. I've done my duty. It's just like I volunteer. I go into the army. I'm going to fight the enemy. I've done my duty. You don't have owe me anything for that. I've done." He said, "Here, I'm getting old. I'm losing everything. Why should an old man such as myself, who cannot taste the food anymore or take the pleasures of food, drink, or even be able to hear or see because I'm losing my eyesight, I'm losing my hearing. I can't have that. All I'm going to be is a burden for you. I would rather not be that. I would rather go across the Jordan with you, give her our farewells, and thank you for being the king. But you don't have to do this. This type of reward is not necessary. I was only doing my duty. Why such rewards? And then 17. Please let your servant turn back again. He says, I want to go back to my home, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. He says, I'll go with you partly, but I want to go home. I want to die in my own home. But here is your servant, Kimham. Now, at first I was pronouncing that Chim, but I was looking it up, and it's pronounced with a K, Kimham. Let him, and by the way, Kimham here is probably Barzillai's son. And to find that out, you can see that in 1 Kings 2:7. I believe it's right there, 2:17. I forget. It's either 2:17 or 2:7. And it lists Barzillai's sons, and he is listed there. So I believe that this is his son. He says, let him cross over with my lord the king and do for him what seems good to you. He says, he's my representative. You do whatever you would have done for me, you do it for him. David agrees to that. And the king answered, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Now, whatever you request of me, I will do for you. In other words, it says, if you request it, I'll honor it. Boy, what a statement. That's like carte blanche. He said, you ask, it's yours. Then 39, then all the people went over the Jordan. When the king had crossed over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own people. One of the questions there is, how did David say goodbye to his friend? Have you ever had a really dear, dear friend that you knew that you're not going to see again? And what do? You tear up, you kiss each other. And I'm not talking about on the lips or anything like that. You kiss each other, and you say your final farewell. You say, thank you, brother, for what you've done. Thank you. And you bless him. David blesses his friend and ally and kisses him. What a dear moment. Reminds me of the time when Paul would kiss his friends that would travel with him. And you say, you will not see me again. And Paul knew exactly how that felt. Well, here we see the same thing. I've seen people that I knew that I would not see again. And that moment that you want to say, I really mean it, and you kiss them. That's how David felt. We get down to the last question here, and that's number 18. And it is this. Who was disappointed that David came back without invitation? Here are two struggling sides that recognize David as king, but they're bickering with each other. One is saying, well, he's from my side. He is a Benjamite. He is kinfolk. We've never taken advantage of him ever because he is the king and he is part of our family. We've never asked anything or sat at his table or asked of any favors. And then we see the northern part. They're saying, well, we represent 10 tribes. And David we are 10 times more than you. And therefore, we have the right to escort him. And what gives you the right, Judah, to come over here and take over, leading David across the Jordan? What gives you that right to do that? And this is what they're arguing over. Who can lead David across the Jordan? So let's listen to this. And now the king went to Gilgal, which I say is now across the Jordan. He is now in I want to say friendly territory. He is now on the side of Israel. And Kimham went with him. And the people of Judah escorted the king and also half the people of Israel. Then we go on, 41. Just then, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stole you away and brought the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan. Do you get it? It says, we're the ones that escorted him. Now they've stolen you away. Why? They don't have that right. We do. Now see how silly that is? But it wasn't silly to them because it divided the nation again. We see now a complete division of jealousy. David could geographically put the nation together, but what he could not do was to make them morally together. They had jealousy and they fought. And so we go on down to the last part of this. So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative of ours, because the king is a close relative of ours. That's why. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have you ever eaten at the king's expense? Have we ever done that? No. Or has he ever given us any gifts? Have we ever asked for anything? No. And then 43, and the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. Shares meaning tribes. We have 10 tribes in the king. Therefore, we also have more right to David than you. Why then do you despise us when we are not the first to advise bringing back the king? He says, how come? But here we see, yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. In other words, they could shout them. They're arguing. Over what? Who's going to bring the king over the Jordan? And what happens? What happens? We have rebellion again, led by Sheba. Who's Sheba? We'll find out next week. Stay tuned. Until then, may God grant you everything you need. And we'll see you again next week. In Jesus' name, amen.